Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
I'm back. Well, you guys actually didn't know that I was on vacation in Arkansas for 2 weeks. Arkansas, who goes to Arkansas? Arkansas was amazing. It was beautiful. I've never been there before, so we decided to go.
And I have still never been there.
No, you should go. There are many things to see in the southern Ozarks. I guess that's where it is. Anyway, there's subtle beauty there. Anyway, sorry guys. Hey, I have to also change the intro. But since we have talented people who help us do that, I have to contact them and get. I'm sorry, Dan. We got to for now. We got to go one without Dan for now, just to have, because Dan won't be here for a little while. But yeah, we got to change the intro. We are back into discussing those and listening to the interviews from 2003 that I was a part of from theonering.com when we got to do roundtable interviews with the writers, Peter Jackson, and the actors in the film. And so this is actually, I think this is actually probably my favorite one. Just because she, maybe Peter Jackson's still my favorite, but she spoke with authority, maybe not with the proper response that I wanted all the time, but she knew what she was talking about. Whereas a lot of the actors were spewing the same lines they gave everybody all the time. But she was a little more thoughtful about it.
I agree. I feel like she had her pulse on the real thread of the making of the movies, and she wasn't overly protective in her answers. She wasn't overly media centric. She seemed really, really genuine. I mean, you were there.
I was.
You were literally there 20 years ago. But it was nice to listen to, because I didn't feel like I was talking to some media person or someone that had their pat answers already. She seemed very genuine.
Yeah. And actually, there's a second person with her, Marty Walsh, who was the second unit director on the films, who you also hear in this give his takes. But it's mostly a discussion with Philippa Boyens, who of course is one of the three screenwriters, along with Fran Walsh and Peter Jackson, of these three films.
Is there a connection between Fran Walsh and Marty Walsh? I was kind of curious.
Nope.
Okay, no relation.
I know of. I don't think so. Well, maybe. I didn't look it up. It never occurred to me.
They're both New Zealanders.
All right. Yeah, somebody in the comments below, look it up and tell us if there's something that you found. But I'm not going to go stalking Fran or Marty.
No.
This.
I was just kind of curious.
You shouldn't either.
No one should stalk anyone over this.
No one at all. All right. So we're gonna listen to this, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about some of her responses, and then in our extended edition, we're gonna get more into two things. One, what went wrong with The Hobbit? Because she was one of the writers on The Hobbit, and we can say, a lot went right with The Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
Especially for me, from the fourth and fifth viewing, I accepted things and I was okay with it. But in The Hobbit, so much went wrong after they left the Shire. And I think that's worth discussing. So in our extended edition, we're going to go ahead and listen to that. And if you want to, we're going to talk about that. And if you want to do that, go to theonering.com/member, become a member, join us on Discord. You can get the extended podcast too right into your app. We also publish it privately on YouTube, so you get links to that both in your emails. We send out an email with it, and as soon as it's up, we put it in the Discord chat and alert everybody there too, so that they can go and watch it. It's usually a day or two before it's released via the podcast. So go ahead and do that, and you can listen to it early, and you can listen to it and listen to the questions that you ask. So you can ask questions in Discord that we will answer, and that's going to become especially important because what we're also going to talk about in our extended podcast is the next thing we're going to do in a little more detail, which is the complete list of film changes, how that's going to work, the process for that. And as we prep for that, we're going to actually take a 1-week hiatus between now and the first published version of that. But you'll still get a weekly podcast with us talking about the changes in it. But then we'll also be publishing it on YouTube in various ways too, so that YouTube and Rumble and anything else I can automatically sync to YouTube to make it easier for me, in order to get them in sort of smaller bite-sized pieces if you want to as well. But we'll talk about that in detail in the extended podcast. So go to theonering.com/member and listen in there. And let's listen to Philippa and Marty, my buddies.
Well, are they? That's good to know.
Yeah, I'm sure they remember me. I'm sure they do. Oh, yeah. All right, here we go.
Here we go.
So how long did you shoot? Well, how long have we been shooting?
Yeah.
927 days was the last count.
927 days.
Count for the DVD shoot. Right. I think for the actual film, we shot continuously really over 4 years. But, we had breaks over Christmas and stuff, but about 920 odd days, which is, I think, a record in anyone's. It certainly wrecked me.
We're keeping it close by. That's why he's in here, because we just keep it close by.
We have to ask you all the questions we had for Fran.
Fran, yep. He can
Did she contribute to the script, and how much did Peter?
Probably you would.
Yeah, no. In terms of, I think you don't know, there is nowhere that Fran stops and Peter begins, and Peter stops and Fran begins, because what I found is a lot of people assume, for example, with weird things, people assume Heavenly Creatures was like Fran, and I made that assumption that was her, that in terms of the story, these two worlds, but it's not all her, just as all the action in Lord of the Rings is not all Peter, they just are the most incredible collaborative unit that I've ever seen in action, that's for sure. And they work seamlessly.
And then
they trust each other.
The actors added a lot to the script, to the story. That's what they're telling us.
They were intimate with you every night.
I love that. Actually, there's probably not one single ad-lib line in that entire script. Except for John Rhys Davies, Gimli. Mm-hmm. No. They were great to work with. They were great to work with in terms of... I love that they feel that way, though. That's nice. That sounds patronizing, but it's true.
Was there a line in the movie that was ad-lib?
From a Gimli.
Really,
yeah, absolutely.
Offhand comment.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think John was probably the only person who managed to do that. Yeah.
Was that in the second film or the third one?
No, all through.
All through.
Yeah. More so in the second and third.
He seems like that kind of guy.
Yeah, he absolutely is. You never knew what was going to come out of his mouth.
He had to in that costume.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But he had, very, well, not a tiny role, but a smallish role that yeah. But no, what I think the actors are trying to say is, just in terms of protecting Fran and my own contribution, is that we were inclusive, because you have to be, and nobody cares about the characters as much as the people that are playing them. And part of the process, because for a lot of them they didn't understand this world, and they got thrown into this incredible... They used to get off the plane and go and do Tolkien 101 with one of us, trying to bring to life this world was critical, that these people understood the characters that they were playing and could play them on a level and in such a way that they were very real. So, yeah. But that's funny.
So you were a Tolkien aficionado when you started?
Well, sort of, I kept getting attributed as being this Tolkien expert, which I'm not at all. I just love the book. Yeah.
What do you say about some of the fans who critique the movies?
Well, we've actually got away really lightly. It's been incredibly good, because given how well loved these books are and how and what kind of esteem they're held, it's amazing to us that I thought contracts were going to be taken out. It's been good. It's been what I love is the way that the majority of them have embraced and understood that the changes that were made were all to do with making it work on film and nothing to do with being arbitrary or anything like that. So hopefully the spirit of the books has been kept intact. I think that's what most of them have acknowledged. And some of the changes, the biggest changes, are just accepted, like the age of Frodo. Frodo should be 50, and he's played by, at the time, a 19-year-old boy. So, that just was seamlessly accepted, which was great.
The one thing, the spirit of the story that I picked up on is the Shire. The Hobbits wanting to get back to the Shire, which I see as a place where they were happy and safe. I've asked each person who's come in here, so ask you, where is your Shire? What is that safe, comfortable, happy place for you?
Definitely Wellington, New Zealand. Definitely, it's very, very, very warm. I think that warmth and generosity of spirit that's in there, and sense of community was borne out by that parade, that ticker tape parade that happened, 100,000 people in a city of about 400,000 turned out, which was incredible. It was so much fun.
Can you
So much fun.
make it even more specific? Is there, when you go back there, is there a particular pub or a garden or a beach that you go back there and you say, this is my Shire?
There's
The editing room?
No, I'm just trying to think. I think my garden, the garden is very. It's got little bits of English country garden with this great mix of sort of slightly wild New Zealand coastal sort of stuff going on. So no, I live by the sea, so keep the windows open at night and you hear the sea rolling in, and just across the road, and it's very beautiful. We have big, huge vista, amazing views with these great hills, and it's pretty empty. The land's pretty empty, so it's easy to sort of feel that you're in a backwater in a good way.
You work for the New Zealand Tourism Bureau?
Is it inspiring for you or distracting as a writer? To
live somewhere.
Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting. To be completely honest with you, I didn't feel like I was living in Wellington for a very long time, because it felt like we were in Middle Earth, because I was working with Fran and Peter, and because I was dealing with these, international actors, and we would take a lot of meetings we'd come over here quite a lot. So for a long while, it didn't feel like I was living there. It felt like it took a long time to actually connect to the place that I was living in, definitely. But now, it's just home. Home is the Shire for anybody, I believe. And I feel sorry for anyone who doesn't have that sense of home. I mean, a genuine, feeling of, there are a lot of people out there who don't have that.
You've known Peter a long time. How do you know when he's upset or when something's not working well?
Marty's probably known him longer than I do.
Yeah. How do you know?
How do you know? Pete goes very quiet, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's bigger worry. He's not a yeller.
No,
He
never.
So if he doesn't say anything all of a sudden, just for a long time.
I've worked with Peter since 15, 16 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard him swear in anger once in memory, and thought it was quite right. He actually, he's upset because he becomes quiet and kind of withdrawn, which isn't like him. He's always quite giving.
Yeah, he's bouncy. He's very friendly. Loves laughing. He's a very funny guy. Loves playing practical jokes and things like that, and he's patient too.
Yeah.
For someone who's actually quite driven in a good way, he's actually incredibly patient. He has an understanding of the process that you have to go through, and he allows it to happen. But I think, and I see a lot of individuals outside of them, of Fran and Pete, and that holds true throughout. I mean, this is not somebody who just goes and takes it out. He cannot believe the stress that guy has shouldered. Unbelievably broad shoulders.
Yeah, I don't know how
I don't know how he did it.
Personally, it was very stressful for everyone.
Yeah.
In my unit, we created a miniature and special effects unit that's now arguably and debatably the best in the world. But we started from scratch 4 years ago.
Right,
we didn't have a history of that sort of shooting. And one of the things that kind of got me through was just knowing that Peter was dealing with lots more stress, and he was coping. So I didn't have a right to lose it or give up. And I think that's kind of a true thing. That's part of the reason Peter, and that sounds wrong because he's not loud, but he's almost charismatic leader for us as Kiwis because he is so down to earth. He doesn't have ego. He doesn't impinge his ego on anyone.
No, he doesn't.
And he just,
it's about the work. That's when he'll get angry. It's about the work. It's when people stuff around or they don't make the work the priority because...
Or don't do their homework.
So for him it's about the work and doing good work, and he gets very frustrated when people get careless. Or for them, they're more worried about the fame or fortune that drives them nuts. But anyway, he's a very easygoing guy.
Has he changed? I mean, now he's a...
No, not much. I think the main thing is, somebody said, actually was his agent, Ken Cameron, said the only thing that he's seen change about Peter is the height of the gate that he has at his house, because now he's had to shut the world out a little bit more, which is true. That's the thing that's changed. He just can't go out anymore. He just can't walk down the
probably
street.
the saddest thing is that he used to be, up until recently, be able to go into town and just go to his favourite shops and walk around without being acknowledged, particularly. He said maybe the odd smile and wave, but now a little more,
He disguised himself in England. It's really funny. Did you know that hair and those glasses?
What did he do?
And that beard, he changed the shape of his glasses and he put this hat on. And he seriously thought that he was unrecognizable. But all that was sticking out of the head, he had the shorts on. And this hair was sticking out from under the hat. And the glasses were just a different round shape. And I said, dude, completely not, totally recognizable. And he was like, no, nobody will recognize me.
That's funny. I did also notice in this film he got a little bit, it's almost like, back in Meet the Feebles days when Gollum eats that fish. I mean, it comes a little more extreme, yeah. It sounds like...
That was Fran, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, she has a little dark side, that girl. She does.
Have you seen The Ghost? I've had him tell me a story before about this ghost in a house that they used to live in Wellington. It appeared in his bed, and Fran said she knew about it.
And I was there when I was around when those stories first came out, and they totally, they're not having you on, that's the question.
Oh no, I believed it when he talked about it. I mean, it's really sincere.
I wouldn't want to, judging. I did spend a lot of time in that flat and never saw anything like that.
Mm-hmm. There's been some talk about in the extended edition extras about what exactly you meant when you called Tolkien an amateur writer.
Right.
And it's just been tossed around a little bit.
That was Fran, actually.
Oh, was that?
No. What we mean by that, because we've both said it actually at various times, is that he didn't set out to write a novel in the same way that professional writers do.
He's not a novelist.
He's not a novelist. He is an incredibly, I would say, almost unsurpassed storyteller, however. And that, to say he was an amateur, it is only to the extent that I think that's where a lot of the heart of the story came from. A lot of the truth. It's an incredibly truthful story, and it's not slick. He needed an editor. God knows the amount of repetition we came across when you actually get into those books. It's just, and was a big problem for us. And a lot of the stuff he did in reportage, like he had a great idea, and instead of going back and rewriting, like for example, you could tell that he had this wonderful idea about how Gandalf escaped from Saruman. Why didn't he do that whole Saruman Gandalf confrontation live? Why didn't you follow Gandalf too? Why was it in reportage? Et cetera. And I can't help thinking that things like that, or certain things like that, because he suddenly had this great idea, and so he decided to tell it as reportage instead of taking you there as an audience. And I think an editor would have said, take the audience there, tell the story from that with more immediacy. Maybe that's what an editor would have said, but would have been easier for us.
Right.
But then, that was his privilege, and I think what's so great about this is that he didn't compromise anything. He told the story the way he wanted to tell it, which is why it is as rich as it is, and why it is as personal as it is, because it's a very personal story. The stuff in that book that works the best is that it is very, very personal. I think the relationship between Frodo and Sam, I think the tragedy of the Shire was very much some things that he genuinely felt, drawn from his own experiences, which is why it's often, I think, it's what you can attribute the success of these stories to.
Did you spend a lot of time? I know the one amazing thing about these stories, about the movies, is that there's so much action.
Yeah.
But when I was in the theater, you hear sniffling and crying and things that people don't associate with the Jerry Bruckheimer movie. No. But this year can have those moments. When Legolas grows up the moment.
I think it's about, we tried not to manufacture the sentiment. We tried to find the real sentiment that is in these books. We had to be true to that. And I think it worked on that level. And hopefully, I think a lot of it can be attributed to the performances of those actors because they're just incredible. Right. Elijah Wood, God bless him, makes me cry still after having seen that I don't know how many times. And Sean Astin. And people got into the spirit of what Peter was trying to do, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Which is tell these stories as if they were real, find the honesty in it so that it is real sentiment, not sentimental, that it's not manufactured emotion. Peter hates that. In fact, he always destroys my stuff that feels like that, which is great, which is what a writer needs, and he makes you go deeper. and he makes you find the truth of that moment as a writer, which is great, which is what you need. Because boy, I could churn out, some stuff that you can do it off. You get in the groove and you can do it off the top of your head. It's probably good enough for some people, but it's not good enough for people. Or Fran, actually.
In the third film, how do you think that works best with Sam and Frodo?
I think what I like about that is that Sam has. I think it is an understanding, a shared understanding, which is why we deliberately put in the beginning of the movie Sam's belief that there would be a return journey was very important. You didn't want to pong it. You just wanted to slip it in there. We didn't want to do a big huge setup. Just get it in there. That Sam has an expectation that there will be a return journey. And that, I think that little scene where he says, I don't think there's going to be a return journey, and Frodo looks at him, something passes between them, which Frodo actually knew already, which is there is no going back. They weren't going to survive this. And that's how they go forward. That's how they proceed. And that's part of their stoicism and heroism as characters. And the only reason they can do that is because they're together. And I think that's a lovely bond. And it's lovely to be able to do that between two male characters without any other kind of political implication or sexual implication on there. It's just the truth of a friendship, a real, genuine friendship. And it's quite clean and,
True.
Yeah. And I think it plays to the experience of the author who obviously went, and even though he hated the allegory of the World Wars, I think you can feel this was written by somebody who went through something like the trenches of World War I.
Plains of Morgoth.
Yeah.
Peter whet our appetite just slightly about King Kong.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you whet our appetite a little bit more?
Oh, man, he's got some ideas that are just going to blow people's minds. It's going to be so exciting.
Yeah, is it going to be a little on the darker side, like
Yeah, there's some interesting concepts being batted around at the moment. We're in the fun stage of we haven't made any mistakes yet. We just anything's possible, and but it's
still basically a Beauty and the Beast story.
I think it is. Although again, finding the truth of that is going to be interesting. What that actually means. What does that really mean? And but what's great about it is I love the fact that we're going to go to the 30s, which was an extraordinary period of history, a very dark decade, quite corrupt, was the decade that the world shrank, and the possibility of comms almost vanished from the world was in the 1930s, because deepest, darkest Africa existed until that plane journey, which, meant you could cross the Atlantic in a day, I mean, all of that stuff started to happen. And the world started to shrink, and the possibility of there being an island like Skull Island out there vanished from this earth. And so what you now have in our world today is a kind of glib fantasy, but it was real. It was real. People didn't know what was down the Amazon or lurking underneath, whatever. That's going to be fun.
You see it as a love triangle?
I love it. What's the honey? Because what's going to come off worse?
Scripting The Hobbit at all?
Oh, God. Do you know the biggest nightmare with that is, this is an interesting thing because people don't understand, is the Fellowship was 9 characters on screen. Just imagine 15 of them. Was the names sort of similar? Shoot me now. You'll be doing the minis, won't you?
You think it's simple?
Were we being interested?
No.
I
think some will be visually intuitive for us, I think. Having seen some of the concepts stuff coming out, I'm actually really looking forward to seeing the movie. No, I didn't say working on it, just seeing it.
Is there ever a consideration of stop motion?
No. Not when we use this look at Sherlock. We'll do Mercat.
We'll be going heavily into nitrous, again, even more so. No, Peter's had a real taste for what is achievable, I think everyone will be very surprised at just what a magnificent film potential will be.
Oh, God. If he gets his way. It's a rampant.
The story will be a lot easier to tell than the Lord of the Rings for a start.
And have you seen any difference in him about this? Because, now we're talking about something really personal to him.
Yeah.
And
no, I think in a way, Lord of the Rings sprang out of the glove of King Kong. So it's interesting that they've been shot the other way around. But I'm glad that Rings has brought Kong to him, because you're right, it is Christian. It's the film that inspired him. I mean, I've been asked why would you remake a classic? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? And the answer is, I think Peter's incredible imagination, and if he wants to go there, I'm on board, and I think a lot of other people are on board, because it's going to be, it will be original in its own way.
And I think you can actually do it justice this time. Right. That there is actually the director and the skill base and the technology to actually, pay homage, because Peter and I are both in love with the original 30s. Right.
I mean, do you think that came about because of Gollum? The idea that it could be done?
No. Peter's love of King Kong is about when he was 13 and doing stop motion.
Right.
Yeah, that's where it's come from.
So a lot different from our previous podcast with everyone except Peter, because she clearly is not. She does not have the kind of answers that an actor has. She's able to answer from the behind the scenes and behind the story perspective, which I really like. But
she did get that question about the Shire.
She did, and she was instant with the answer which made sense. She said her answer was Wellington is the Shire, which, I mean, she's not a native of, but
it still wasn't good enough for the journalist who asked it. She's like, yeah, Wellington isn't good enough. Specifically, lady, where is your Shire? Tell me. I don't accept these generalizations of cities. I don't know. We were really also tired of it.
That journalist was really attached to that question.
I should have found the article that she wrote about that. Like, I don't. Anyway, so so her answers were far more thoughtful, starting with that whole Shire idea. Maybe let's talk a little bit about her whole ad-libbing thing, because that was, if you listen to it, that was sort of a funny. I think did I ask that? I think I asked that question too. So like, who asked? Who ad-libbed in the film and what made it into the movies? And she said, like, well, nothing except for John Rhys Davies. And so and then somebody commented that well, that's not what the actors are telling us. And she's like, oh, isn't that cute of them? Because she tried to walk that back a little bit, but she was like, no, we didn't. We might have edited out any sort of things, but they never revealed what the ad-libs actually were. I don't think. I've looked and I can't find what the ad-libs were. I'm sure Gimli's like, maybe it's the dwarves are very dangerous over short distances. We're natural born sprinters, or the burp. I don't know what else, but yeah.
Actually, the burp I don't think would have been, because the whole scene point of it was watching his face as he transitioned from drunk to burp.
That's true. That's true.
So, but yeah, some of his lines might have, but like she said, probably most of it edited out.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think is good, because I don't care that much for actors ad-libbing Tolkien.
No, I'm sure if Christopher Lee was there, he's like, John, you're not allowed to speak that way. This is not part of the book, John.
It is interesting because she referenced how highly collaborative at the beginning. She referenced how highly collaborative Fran and Peter were, and then she talked a little bit about her own relationship in the writing with how Peter interacts with her. But I'm not going to say anything more about that, because that's the extended podcast. So subscribe, people, so you can hear what we think about what went wrong with The Hobbit versus this. But funnily enough, she actually also, to prep another one of our podcasts coming in a few weeks, she also mentioned one of the major changes in the beginning, which is the age of Frodo. She mentions that Frodo was supposed to be 50 years old, and he's being played by a 19-year-old, or at least at the time of the initial shooting, 19 years old, and which was good. I mean, like, we'll get into that in a few weeks as far as that kind of what that change means and why, whether we like it or not. But I did like the fact that she called herself not a Tolkien expert, but just a lover of Tolkien, but she knew she had enough details down, which from the beginning, if you hear the very first line, or one of the first lines, she references that they've been shooting for 927 days at that point, which is a lot of shooting. That's like 2.5 years straight if you do 7 days a week of shooting. That's incredible.
Yeah, and you can imagine they say at least Ian McKellen said that Peter Jackson was rereading the book every night and what they were shooting the next day to try and still get the spirit and the idea right. And so you can imagine she was on set too, how much she probably knew the books inside and out. And granted, she might not know some of the details that in our experience reading on fairy stories or the letters of Tolkien or the histories of Middle Earth and all the tertiary books that were published, after he passed away. But she has a knowledge of who the characters are. And I think she talks about trying to hold to the way Tolkien wanted to tell the story, right? Not the way that they want to tell the story, which is
Exactly.
like 20 years later is still really different from what people think today. I mean, even in colleges and universities, right? Fiction is there to be molded into what you want to make it, like what you want it to say. And that's not, and I like that's not where they started from. We're not putting our messages into this. And right away after she says that, the question was, the question about Sam and Frodo's relationship was brought up.
Well, exactly. By who? Who was it? Who brought that up, Jonathan?
Was that me?
I think you started it. You actually, I was very impressed. I could some of the other interviews I couldn't really recognize who.
Yeah.
This one I recognized your voice, and I liked it. You did a great job. You asked the kind of questions that journalists should be asking, as opposed to questions that a 6-year-old would ask, like where's your Shire?
Like, why did you call Tolkien an amateur author?
Oh yeah, that was great. That was great. Very, very nice journalistic. A little pushing. And she, I liked her answer to that. She said, first she joked and tried to say it was Fran that had done that, and it wasn't her. And then she admitted, it's both of us. And here's what we meant. She said, first of all, when I say he's an amateur writer, it's important that you understand that he's an unsurpassed storyteller. So which was good to start with there. Mm-hmm. But she referenced the fact that she thought that there were a lot of things that he put into the book eventually as they came to him, that if he had been a professional novelist, he would have gotten more pushback from his editors to say, fill this out. And she gave one clear example, which was she felt that it kind of popped into his head that the initial encounter, or at least the violent encounter between Gandalf and Saruman, their confrontation that happens where Gandalf ends up being imprisoned, and she thought that if he had been a quote unquote professional writer, his editor would have told him, hey, look, let's fill this out. Let's do first person on this, not just be a reported fact that like Gandalf just reports on it in the Council of Elrond. Yeah. He doesn't. So she was, that was an example. And I understand the distinction I think that she's trying to go for, which is the distinction between someone who makes their living sitting and writing. And Tolkien, of course, was a professor, and he made his living as an academic, and then did writing on the side until a certain point. I don't know what year that was, but when he retired.
No, I don't think it was until the 60s.
Yeah,
if I remember right. It was like early to mid 60s. Like he was only retired.
64, 65.
Anyway, that sounds about right.
So he was mostly through most of his, he writes The Hobbit in the mid 30s. So and the Lord of the Rings begins in the late 30s and through the 50s, and so while he's writing Lord of the Rings, he is indeed a professional academic, not a professional writer in that sense. But yeah, what do you think of it?
Well, I think that the idea that what is professional writing too? I mean, a professional novel, writing a professional novel is a framework that has been constructed over the last however many years. I'm not even like you would say even between the 71 years between now and when the Lord of the Rings was first published, right? Things have changed, right? The novelization structures have changed. The expectations. I mean, you can't go back and reread, Moby Dick and say like, oh, this is exactly how it. No, you're reading entire chapters about what whaling is like, and they don't do that nowadays. But you still consider it one of the great novels of all time from one of the greatest storytellers who wrote not just Moby Dick but other stories too. So the idea that he's not a professional. He's not a professional. He's an amateur novelist, maybe, because he only wrote one. He didn't practice that. But I wouldn't say, like, when it comes to writing with the amount that he did on the side, obviously, I wouldn't call him an amateur writer so much. I think he uses the words writer.
Yeah, and I do think that do think it's interesting that you say that, because it does feel a little bit to me like her distinction is the same distinction that someone when someone first told me, oh, the athletes that are in the Olympics are amateur athletes. They aren't this is before they started allowing professional athletes before the 90s and it was that distinction of, oh, sure, they may be doing some of the best, most impressive physical feats in the world,
but they're just amateurs.
But they don't get paid for their day job as an athlete, so therefore they're just amateurs.
Right.
So that it had a little bit of that distinction, which
and it might be that she was also trying to validate some of the decisions they made based on that, and which like about how plotting and keeping Frodo young, like the timeline compression between, you couldn't really do 20 years between as Frodo was waiting for Gandalf to return, right? Or however many years that was, 20, 30? 17, okay. 20. So it was funny because that was a big to-do on our message boards back then about that leaked out. I don't remember where or what exactly it came from, but that she called him an amateur writer, and people were taking, particularly on our website, people were taken aback and were like, well, how dare you?
And I feel like I understand that sentiment too, because ultimately, what is this kind of a novel? A novel is just storytelling, okay? So it feels a little bit like a late 20th century distinction to say he's an amateur writer. And the reason is because even her example that she uses is one where she's referencing the whole professional structure, the commercialized structure around writing that was sort of sprung up in the mid-20th century. And so she, thinking to herself, like, if he had this full structure like a modern day fantasy author does, his parts would have been shorter, maybe, and she didn't say this, I'm just imagining.
You're just,
there are things that modern fantasy writers use and don't use that, like, I love your example of Moby Dick, because that's a great example of early storytelling. Don Quixote is one of the earliest, and when you see like the asides that Cervantes does in Don Quixote and the others, it is unbelievable. He goes on for like a chapter about ridiculous things that we would find like no editor would ever publish a book like that.
Like, you can't put that in there.
Exactly. So to me, it's more of a modern framework for that distinction. So I have to admit, Jonathan, I did find it amusing that as part of your question, you had a couple questions, and as part of your other question, you referenced Legolas running up a mumuk, which was hilarious to me. Because I'm beginning to think you have a little bit of an obsession with Legolas here, and I like always focus.
Hey, that wasn't in the books. The walking on snow thing, I'll own. This one here, I will stand by it as I just think that was still sort of silly, like the magical Legolas. Even then, I didn't like it a whole lot. But my point was that it was the emotional notes were hit in Return of the King, and that was where those are the hardest ones to hit. I mean, you can make it, whiz bang action in 2003 was not that hard to make. We already had Jerry Bruckheimer making the crazy big movies back in the day. But hitting the emotional notes of Frodo and Sam, of Aragorn and Arwen, even of Faramir and Éowyn, right? These or Éowyn and Theoden, right? These things that were really difficult. Even though when you think Theoden is really a tertiary character in the movies, but his death scene is given its due, and I think a lot of people, even journalists, were surprised at that. I mean, it was a 3-hour-long film, but and she said that she let Tolkien tell the story. She wanted to keep it close to what he wrote, and that was one of the reasons why it worked. And even in her mind, that was one of the reasons why it worked. In the same way, that's why Sam and Frodo's relationship worked, because it was a real, genuine friendship. It wasn't made to be anything else, anything romantic, like I'm sure today they would try and do, or any other injection of modern sensibilities.
Right. She was really, I liked it because she was really specific about that. And she said that off of your questions, she called out specifically a few of the moments between Sam and Frodo. And she said specifically that the reality of that relationship was based on stoicism, the two, their heroism, and the bond of friendship that they had. And she specifically noted that the friendship, there's nothing political there, nothing sexual. So which is, to me, I chuckle. I'm like, so Tolkien Society can go suck. And I'm sorry. Oh boy.
Yeah, that was close. Yeah, you almost pulled back real fast there.
We'll edit that out. Maybe.
No, we won't. No. We're keeping that
So-
right in. Yeah. All right. Well, so I mean, I think she ends on not wanting to write The Hobbit, which maybe she should have stood by after the fact.
Seems like her intuition.
I mean, and her point was, like imagine 12 dwarves with all, 3 or 4 of them each have similar names altogether. So that was her deal. But we're going to talk about that in the extended podcast. We're going to talk about our complete list of film changes coming up. And speaking of that, boy, I should have mentioned this earlier. Go to theonering.com/changes. If there are changes we missed, you can submit them there and we'll add them to the list and make sure that we address them. And I'm sure as we publish them, we'll get more and more responses from people saying like, hey, what about this? And so we might have to go back and occasionally do some ones that we missed, but we'll get through it all. Go to theonering.com/changes for that. Go to theonering.com/member to hear this extended podcast. Join the discussion on Discord. We're finishing up Taliesin in our book club. That's now meeting on Monday nights, I believe, at 9:30 Eastern, if I remember right. Maybe it's 10:30 Eastern. I can't remember, something like that. But you'll find out if you become a member at theonering.com/member and join our Discord chat there.
And for everybody else, bye-bye, freeloaders.